Welcome to the Funeral Channel podcast.
Oh, boy.
Okay, right, just kidding. But seriously, I want you to imagine for a second that you are 3 miles offshore.
Just completely surrounded by water.
Exactly. The boat's engine's cut out, and all you hear is the wind and, that rhythmic, hollow slap of the hull against the open water.
It's a very specific sound.
It really is. So you step to the edge of the deck, and you place a beautifully crafted, biodegradable urn on the surface of the water.
Right.
And you just watch it slowly, gently slip beneath the waves. Today, we are exploring why a rapidly growing number of people are completely abandoning traditional cemeteries.
You're just opting out entirely.
Yeah. For what is being called the last sale, we are taking a deep dive into a really profound shift in how we handle an inevitable part of the human experience.
It's a huge shift, and it's really an intersection of history, intense environmentalism, shifting economics, and obviously deeply personal choices.
Exactly. And all of this is laid out in a really fascinating document we've got today, provided by the Funeral Program site.
Titled The Last Sail, Exploring Burial at Sea for Loved Ones.
Right. So our mission today is to figure out how a stark necessity for ancient sailors has become this, highly deliberate, beautiful, and complex choice for everyday people.
It's quite the evolution.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that image I just painted, it's compelling.
It's incredibly compelling, and it really gets right to the heart of what we are analyzing today in this deep dive.
We aren't just going to catalog the logistical rules of maritime burials, right?
No, definitely not. Although, to be fair, those rules are surprisingly intricate. They dictate almost every single aspect of how this works.
Which we will absolutely get into.
Right, but we really need to examine the psychological and economic forces driving this trend. Like, why are families looking at a static plot of land and saying, no, I want the ocean?
Yeah, why the ocean?
The framework here requires us to look at the tension between human grief, which desperately wants permanence, and the ocean, which is, the ultimate symbol of impermanence.
Right, and just looking at that exact phrase from the source, the last sale, it completely short-circuits the normal imagery of a funeral.
It really does.
Usually you think of a very static, rooted, unmoving event, a heavy stone marker, a fixed plot of earth.
An absolute full stop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's an absolute full stop. But the last sale asks you to reframe that entirely. It changes the imagery from a full stop to a continuation, a voyage.
It's very poetic.
It is. But before we get totally swept away in the poetry of that, I think we have to ground this in reality.
Yeah, we have to look at the history.
Right. Because this highly romanticized civilian eco-alternative we have today, it did not start out as a lifestyle choice.
Not at all.
The source is very explicit about the lineage here. It traces it directly back to historical maritime traditions.
It does. And that historical context, it's non-negotiable if you really want to understand the modern practice.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, for centuries, committing a body to the deep wasn't a choice made out of environmental consciousness, right?
Yeah, they weren't thinking about their carbon footprint in the 1700s.
Exactly. Or a desire for a poetic send-off. It was born out of the unforgiving reality of life on a ship.
Pure survival.
Right. When a sailor passed away weeks or even months from the nearest port, the crew was faced with a biological and logistical imperative.
See, that's where I get hung up a bit. We hear the phrase maritime tradition, and it sounds very noble.
It has a certain ring to it.
It does. But let's be real about the historical reality for a second. You're stuck on a wooden ship in the middle of the Atlantic. It's going to take 3 months to reach land.
You can't just keep a body below deck.
Right. It feels like an emergency disposal out of sheer desperation. It sounds like a grim, brutal necessity. You just have to get the body off the ship for the safety of the crew.
Which is absolutely true on a practical level.
But the document we are analyzing specifically pushes back against that grim imagery. It emphasizes that these sailors were committed to the ocean with, quote, dignity and respect.
It makes a very specific point of that.
It does. And I struggle to reconcile the sheer, hygiene necessity of it with this idea of a revered nautical honor.
I get why that seems contradictory, but I think you have to separate the catalyst for the action from the actual execution of the action.
Okay, meaning what exactly?
Well, the environment absolutely dictated the necessity. Like we said, you could not keep a body below deck. It was a matter of basic survival and sanitation for the rest of the crew.
Right, disease would spread instantly.
Exactly. However, the psychological reality of a ship's crew is that they functioned as an isolated, incredibly tight-knit society.
Oh, that makes sense. They were out there alone for years sometimes.
Right. To simply dispose of a crewmate without ceremony would deeply demoralize the remaining men. It would be devastating to the ship's morale.
Ah, I see.
So what's fascinating here is how they formalized it. The source highlights this dignity and respect because they didn't just toss someone overboard.
They made it a ritual.
Yes. The crew would gather, the captain would act as the surrogate clergy, specific words were spoken, and the canvas shroud was prepared in a highly specific, traditional manner.
Okay, so they engineered a recognized, honorable ritual out of a desperate situation.
Exactly. They imposed order on the chaos of death at sea.
Okay, so it's really about maintaining the social fabric of the ship. That makes a lot of sense. You need the ritual to separate the crew from the stark brutality of their environment.
Precisely.
But there is a massive leap from a 17th century naval captain reading a prayer over a canvas sack to a modern family chartering a yacht for an eco-friendly farewell.
A huge leap, yeah.
Because for a very long time, this was an incredibly exclusive club, right? Even if it was honorable, it was gated.
It was very restricted.
It was for the Navy. It was for career mariners.
Yeah.
If you worked in a bank your whole life, the ocean just wasn't an option for you.
And that exclusivity is precisely what is dissolved today, and it's a monumental cultural shift.
The democratization of it?
Exactly. What the text is really describing here is the total democratization of a historically gated ritual. The barriers have totally fallen.
You don't need a military background anymore.
Right. You no longer need to have a DD-214 from the Navy or a lifetime of service in the Merchant Marines to access this. It has become fully available to the civilian population.
Which completely blows the doors off the traditional funeral industry's menu of options.
It completely upends it.
Democratization.
Yeah.
That really is the core of it. You are taking a ritual heavily guarded by the military and handing it to the general public.
And by doing that, you're offering people a totally different psychological framing.
Right, for end-of-life planning. You aren't just walking into a funeral home and picking out a mahogany box in a square of grass.
No, you are actively planning a voyage.
And notice how the document positions that voyage. It doesn't merely present it as an alternative geographical location for a body,
It's not just moving the cemetery to the water.
Exactly. It argues that this practice captures a dual purpose. It says it honors the emotional depth of loss while fostering an enduring connection to nature.
Which sounds absolutely beautiful on paper.
It really does.
Yeah.
But if I'm a civilian deciding I want this last sail, I imagine I can't just throw a varnished casket off the back of a rented pontoon boat.
Oh, please do not do that.
Right. The romantic, poetic idea has to crash into reality at some point. So if we look at the actual logistics today, how does a family navigate that friction?
The friction between the emotional wish and maritime law.
Exactly. Because it can't just be a free-for-all out there.
It definitely isn't. The friction is substantial and the regulations are unforgiving.
I would imagine so.
If a family chooses what the source identifies as a full-body burial, the parameters are incredibly strict. It requires highly deliberate, highly regulated planning.
So no rented pontoon boats and standard caskets.
Definitely not. You mentioned throwing a varnished casket off a pontoon boat. That is exactly the kind of environmental and logistical disaster the regulations are designed to prevent.
I mean, logically, standard caskets are practically designed to be buoyant, right?
They are.
They are sealed tight, they trap air. If you put that in the water, it's just going to float. And eventually it's going to wash ashore somewhere.
Which would be a horrific violation of the dignity we discussed earlier, not to mention a massive public health and legal issue.
Right. Nobody wants to find that on their morning beach walk.
Exactly. That is why the source explicitly mandates the use of weighted, biodegradable caskets or shrouds. This is where the physics of the ocean meet the regulations of the state.
Let's dive into the how of that. How does this actually work mechanically?
It's fascinating from an engineering perspective.
I think people hear biodegradable casket and assume it's just a regular box made of cardboard. But you need something that sinks rapidly and breaks down safely in salt water.
Right, without polluting the ecosystem. The engineering of these materials is quite specific. A traditional casket is treated with toxic varnishes. It's lined with synthetic fabrics.
And fitted with heavy metal hinges and handles.
Exactly. None of that belongs in the ocean. The regulations require materials that the marine environment can rapidly assimilate.
So what are we talking about here?
We are talking about untreated natural woods, woven wicker, or natural fiber shrouds like cotton or linen.
Okay, so totally organic, but what about the sinking part?
Ah, that's where the ballast comes in. The requirement for weights is a functional, unyielding necessity. The remains must descend swiftly and permanently to the ocean floor.
Because the human body is naturally buoyant.
Right. Yes, and the shroud or casket itself displaces water, so they have to perfectly counteract that natural buoyancy.
It's intense to think about. You are basically calculating ballast and displacement for a funeral.
You really are.
And you have to do all of this in a very specific location. The document brings up this massive logistical hurdle, which is the 3 nautical mile rule.
The 3 mile line, yes.
You can't just sail out to the local bay right off the public beach and conduct a full-body burial. But 3 nautical miles seems a bit arbitrary to me, honestly.
It seems like a random number.
Yeah. Why not 1 mile? Why not 10? What magically happens at that 3 mile mark?
Well, the 3 nautical mile line is deeply rooted in international and maritime law. It was originally based on the historical distance a cannonball could be fired from the shore.
Wait, really? The cannon shot rule?
Yes, the
Yeah.
cannon shot rule. That's what defined territorial waters back in the day.
That is wild. But how does that apply to environmental regulations today?
In a modern ecological context, which is what the source's emphasis on environmental regulations points toward, it serves a critical zoning function.
Okay, zoning for the ocean.
Right. The first few miles of coastal waters are an intensely active, highly sensitive zone.
Oh, I see. You've got commercial fishing, recreational boating, swimming, surfing.
Exactly.
Not to mention the coastal tidal currents that are constantly churning and pushing things back toward the land.
Precisely. If a burial occurs too close to shore, the risk of remains being disturbed by human activity or pushed back to the beach by coastal currents is completely unacceptable.
Right, that goes back to the dignity aspect.
Yes. By mandating that full-body burials occur at least 3 nautical miles out, regulators are ensuring you pass beyond that chaotic coastal churn.
You get past all the noise and the tides.
You are entering deeper, more stable waters where the descent will be undisturbed. It is essentially creating a massive buffer zone to protect the public.
And protect the coastal ecosystem.
And protect the sanctity of the resting place itself.
Zoning laws for the ocean. I really love that framing. But listening to all of this, the specialized shrouds, calculating weights, chartering a vessel capable of safely traveling 3 miles offshore with a full body.
It's a lot.
It sounds exhaustingly complex. I completely see why the document notes that full-body burial is the less common option. The barrier to entry is massive.
Just in terms of logistics and planning, yes, it is massive.
Which brings us to the other path. Because the source identifies cremation followed by ash scattering as the, quote, more popular choice.
It is far more common, yes. And the document attributes this directly to flexibility and ease of planning.
Makes sense.
When you remove a full weighted body from the equation, the logistical footprint shrinks dramatically.
But I want to be really careful here. Because I think there is a huge misconception about scattering ashes.
No, absolutely there is.
People hear the word flexibility, and they think it's a total free-for-all. They think they can just grab an urn, hike down to a public pier on a windy Tuesday, and toss the ashes into the surf.
Or rent a jet ski and do it, yeah.
Exactly.
Look, if we connect this to the bigger picture of environmental and legal responsibility, that kind of freelance scattering is exactly what maritime professionals warn against.
Right. You can't just wing it.
No. Just because the physical footprint is smaller doesn't mean the jurisdictional rules evaporate. The source strongly emphasizes the necessity of coordinating with licensed providers.
Licensed providers who specialize in maritime services. That's the exact phrase.
Yes.
Explain the why behind that for us. Why do I need a licensed professional just to scatter ashes? It feels like an unnecessary middleman if I'm not dealing with the heavyweights and the shrouds.
I get why it feels that way, but it's because the ocean is a dynamic, unpredictable, and highly regulated environment.
Okay.
A licensed maritime provider isn't just a boat driver. They are essentially your funeral director for the sea.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
They know the exact GPS coordinates where scattering is legally permitted and ecologically safe.
So they handle the paperwork.
They handle the necessary reporting and permits required by environmental protection agencies. But perhaps even more critically, they understand the immediate physical environment.
The weather, the water.
Yes. The wind patterns, the surface currents, the behavior of the vessel in the water.
That physical environment piece is so important. I was reading some accounts of this while prepping for the deep dive.
It can go wrong very easily.
It really can. If a family goes out on a private boat and they don't understand how wind shear works over open water, or they scatter the ashes off the wrong side of the boat.
Oh, no.
Right? The ashes don't go into the water. They blow right back into the faces of the grieving family.
It's awful.
It turns what is supposed to be a beautiful, dignified moment into a deeply distressing, chaotic disaster.
Exactly. And that is why the text states these professionals ensure that all legal requirements are met and that the ceremony is conducted smoothly.
They act as a buffer.
They manage the friction of the physical world so the family doesn't have to. The family is in a state of profound grief. They should not be worrying about maritime compliance.
Or calculating wind vectors.
Right. The professional captain absorbs all of that burden.
Okay, so let's assume the family has navigated all of this. They hired the license provider. They've traveled past the 3-mile mark. The engines of the boat finally cut out.
You are just drifting.
You are. And this is the moment where we transition from cold logistics, the rules, the weights, the coordinates, into the actual deeply personal human element.
The ceremony itself.
Yeah. How do families actually structure a ceremony when they are floating out in the middle of nowhere?
Well, the environment demands a totally different kind of ceremony. The source notes that families personalize the event with readings, prayers, music, or simply moments of silence.
Right.
But the canvas, as you might say, is entirely different from a manicured lawn in a cemetery.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, visually and psychologically. We are completely conditioned by land-based funerals.
We really are. We expect a certain sequence of events.
Yes. You sit in a row of chairs on artificial turf, someone gives a eulogy, the casket is lowered into a perfectly rectangular hole, and maybe you throw a handful of dirt.
It's very grounded.
But out on the water, the document highlights a specific practice that I think is incredibly striking. It mentions the use of biodegradable urns that float briefly before sinking.
Often accompanied by the release of flowers, yes.
That visual is profoundly different from a traditional interment, isn't it?
It fundamentally alters the psychology of the farewell.
Let's break down that psychology, because in a traditional burial, gravity is the dominant force. The casket is lowered. It is a sudden, harsh, downward motion.
It feels incredibly final.
It literally feels like a door shutting on that person's physical existence.
Ugh.
But a floating urn. Think about the mechanics of what the source is describing.
You place this urn on the water.
Right. Maybe it's made of pressed sand or recycled paper or rock salt. You place it on the surface of the ocean. It bobs there. It doesn't disappear immediately.
It stays with you for a moment.
Exactly. It creates a sort of...
It creates a liminal space, a transition period.
Yes. It's a transition. As the biodegradable material slowly takes on water, it begins to gradually lose its buoyancy. It descends inch by inch into the blue.
It's a slow, visual fading away rather than a door slamming shut.
I'd argue it's even more complex than that because the environment is actively participating in the ritual.
That's a really good point.
When you synthesize that slow descent with the text emphasis on personalization, you realize these aren't just aesthetic choices to make the ceremony look cinematic.
No, they serve a psychological purpose.
They are active physical representations of the grieving process itself. Letting go is notoriously difficult for the human mind to process.
We want to hold on.
We do. So the act of placing the urn on the water, watching the ocean slowly claim it, watching the flowers drift away on the current, it literalizes the act of letting go.
And it forces you to relinquish control.
Yes, the control aspect is huge.
In a cemetery, we try to control everything. We cut the grass to exactly 2 inches, we polish the granite, we seal the vault to keep the elements out.
We are trying to freeze time.
We are trying to exert total control over nature. But when you release an urn into the ocean, you are actively surrendering to the elements.
You can't control the waves.
You can't control where the flowers drift or how fast the urn sinks.
Which is why the ocean offers such a, quote, wide range of meaningful expressions, as the text notes.
Exactly. The rigidity of a standard cemetery plot is replaced by the complete, unconstrained vastness of the natural world.
The sound of the wind, the unpredictable swell of the water.
The sheer horizon, all of it becomes an integral part of the farewell. It is an embrace of impermanence.
I can see how that is incredibly freeing for some people, but I have to push back a little here.
Sure, go ahead.
Isn't that lack of control, that vast impermanence, also a bit terrifying? I can easily see some families finding the lack of a physical headstone deeply unsettling.
The lack of a specific GPS coordinate on land, you mean?
Right, a place they can walk up to and touch. Without that, it might feel like you were just throwing your loved one into a chaotic abyss.
It is a valid fear, and it represents a fundamental divide in how people process memory.
How so?
Well, for those who require a specific localized locus of grief, a bench to sit on, a stone to read burial at sea might be highly distressing.
It wouldn't work for them at all.
Exactly. However, for those who choose this path, the lack of a specific marker isn't a bug, it's a feature.
Okay, explain that.
The locus of grief shifts from a tiny square of grass in a single town to the entire ocean.
Oh, wow.
Because the oceans are interconnected, a family member can stand on a beach in California, or a cliff in Ireland, or a pier in Japan, and feel physically connected to the resting place of their loved one.
That is wow. The memorial is everywhere the water touches.
Yes, the memorial is everywhere the water touches.
That is a massive paradigm shift. But, as moving as that philosophy is, we can't ignore the very pragmatic, earthly concerns that are driving this trend.
The practical realities.
Exactly. The document makes it very clear that this isn't just surging in popularity because people are suddenly reading more sea poetry.
Right. There are tangible drivers.
There are two incredibly powerful, practical pillars discussed in the text that are pushing people away from cemeteries: money and the planet.
Let's tackle the economics first.
Okay, let's do it.
Economic realities cannot be separated from end-of-life decisions, and the modern traditional funeral has become a massive, often cost-prohibitive industry.
It really has. It's shockingly expensive.
The text addresses this variance, noting that while chartering private vessels for full-body burials carries higher expenses, ash scattering is generally more affordable.
But the real kicker, the major economic takeaway the document provides, is the comparison.
Right.
Regardless of whether you choose full body or ash scattering, the ocean is fundamentally more cost-effective than the land.
And we must examine exactly why that is. The text explicitly cites the absence of cemetery fees and long-term maintenance costs.
Those two factors alone completely rewire the financial burden on a grieving family.
They do. Let's pull the curtain back on those traditional costs for a second to understand what the text is comparing this to.
Yeah, let's break down the traditional cemetery costs.
When you buy a burial plot, you aren't just paying someone to dig a hole. You are participating in a highly inflated real estate market.
You are buying a premium piece of land.
Yes. Then you have the vault liner, the headstone, the casket itself, and then, as the text notes, the long-term maintenance costs, which the industry usually calls perpetual care.
Right. You are essentially paying into an endowment so that a landscaping crew mows the grass around your grave for the next century.
It is an ongoing financial obligation tied to a physical asset. What the text is revealing about burial at sea is a total reallocation of resources.
A reallocation? Meaning what?
Well, let's be clear. This isn't about families just trying to find the cheapest disposal method possible.
Right. It's not about being cheap.
No. It is a conscious decision about where to place value. When a family chooses the ocean, they are prioritizing a one-time, profound, experiential event over the perpetual lease of real estate.
They're investing in the ceremony itself.
Exactly. The charter of a beautiful vessel, the hiring of a professional captain, the creation of a memory, rather than investing in concrete and turf.
It's the classic modern shift, valuing experiences over physical assets, even in death.
Exactly.
And honestly, for a highly mobile society, it makes total sense. Why sink $10,000 into a plot of land in a city your children are likely going to move away from and rarely visit?
It doesn't align with how we live now.
It really doesn't. So the economics make the ocean incredibly appealing, but that brings us to the second practical pillar, the environment.
Right.
The document explicitly cites environmental impact as a key driver.
This is where the modern consciousness regarding our carbon footprint really intersects with mortality.
Yep.
The text argues that burial at sea, when strictly adhering to those regulations we discussed earlier, is an eco-friendly option that minimizes harm to marine ecosystems.
I'm really glad the text includes that caveat when conducted properly.
But it's an important distinction.
Because we have to contrast what the ocean burial looks like against the staggering environmental toll of a traditional land burial. We don't often think about cemeteries as environmental hazards, but they are essentially massive, toxic land use projects.
The statistics on traditional burials are incredibly sobering. You're looking at millions of gallons of embalming fluid, which contains formaldehyde, a known carcinogen buried in the earth each year.
It's wild when you say it out loud.
And you have millions of tons of concrete and steel used for burial vaults just to keep the ground from settling.
Plus the heavy machinery required to excavate.
Exactly, and
Right.
the perpetual use of water, fertilizers, and pesticides to maintain the unnatural aesthetic of a perfect green lawn. A traditional cemetery is an exercise in resource consumption and environmental defiance.
Environmental defiance. That is exactly what it is. We are pumping bodies full of chemicals and locking them in metal boxes to defy nature's attempt to break them down.
We are fighting the ecosystem.
We are. But the source's emphasis on sustainable practices shows that the ocean burial is the exact inverse of that philosophy.
It is an intentional surrender to the ecosystem rather than a fight against it.
Yes.
By utilizing untreated woods, natural fibers, and salt-based urns, the practice introduces zero synthetic materials or toxins into the environment.
The marine ecosystem is highly efficient at assimilating organic matter.
It's returning the elements to the earth or the water, in this case as quickly and harmlessly as possible.
We spend so much of our lives trying to be sustainable now. We recycle, we try to reduce plastic, we think about our carbon footprint.
It's constantly on our minds.
Right. And this document is essentially saying that sustainability doesn't have to stop when your life does. Your final physical act on this planet can be one of zero impact.
Or even positive impact.
Positive impact. How so?
Well, if you consider that the organic material is simply re-entering the natural food web of the marine environment, it aligns perfectly with the values of an eco-conscious generation.
Which is a brilliant way to look at it.
Uh,
But as we move toward the end of our deep dive, I want to step away from the pragmatic economics and the ecological science.
let's shift back to the emotional core.
Exactly. Because the text doesn't end on a spreadsheet. It ends on the human mind. It explores the profound psychological effect that this specific, massive environment has on a grieving family.
It does. The document describes the experience as both powerful and healing.
And it directly attributes that psychological healing to the unique atmospheric conditions of the ocean.
It specifically notes that its vastness provides perspective, while the gentle movement creates calm.
There's this sensory immersion out on the water that you just cannot replicate on land.
You're completely enveloped by it.
The sound of the wind, the smell of the salt, the physical sensation of the boat rising and falling with the swell. It forces you out of your head and into your physical body.
It grounds you in the moment.
But there is one specific phrase in this section of the text that I keep turning over in my mind. It's almost a contradiction. It says the ceremony offers closure in a setting that feels both intimate and infinite.
Ah, yes. This raises a really important question. How can an environment defined by its unfathomable scale, the infinite simultaneously foster intimacy?
It seems completely paradoxical.
It does. The ocean is terrifyingly huge. It's the definition of infinity for the human eye. How does that feel personal?
Right, so how does the text resolve that?
The synthesis happens through the vessel itself. When you charter a boat and travel miles offshore, you are executing a physical separation from the rest of human society.
You leave it all behind.
You leave behind the traffic, the cell phone towers, the noise of the coastline, the casual observers in a cemetery. You create a tiny, isolated microcosm on the deck of that ship.
And it contains only the people who matter most to the deceased.
Exactly. That forced isolation breeds intense intimacy.
So the boat acts as an intimate, hyper-focused bubble of memory and grief. You are entirely present with each other because there is literally nowhere else to go.
Precisely. And that intimate, highly focused bubble is entirely surrounded by the infinite.
You have this tiny nucleus of human emotion set against the backdrop of an unbroken horizon and bottomless water.
And the text asserts that this contrast provides a sense of perspective. I think that is the most profound psychological insight in the entire document.
Explain that a bit more. What kind of perspective?
Well, when you suffer a profound loss, your grief feels like it takes up all the oxygen in the universe.
It is suffocating.
It feels larger than the world itself. If you were standing in a small room at a funeral home, or even next to a small rectangular hole in the ground, that grief just echoes off the walls.
It bounces right back at you.
Right. But when you stand on the deck of a boat and look out at an ocean that covers most of the planet, an ocean that has been churning for billions of years.
It contextualizes the grief.
Yes. It doesn't diminish the reality or the pain of the loss, but it scales it. It places the individual human experience within the massive, enduring scale of the natural world.
It reminds you that the world is overwhelmingly large, and that natural cycles are ancient and unbreakable.
That perspective diffuses the sharpest edges of the pain,
It releases the deceased and the grief itself into the vastness of the world.
which perfectly encapsulates the overarching philosophy found at the very end of the source document.
That the funeral program site frames this practice not as a creative method of disposal.
Right. But as a literal continuation of life's natural cycle. The ocean is not treated as a watery graveyard. It is an active, endlessly churning, living ecosystem.
So when you drop that urn, the person doesn't just disappear into a void, they become integrated into the living system.
They become part of the continuation. It's a transformation from an individual into the infinite.
It is the ultimate expression of returning to nature.
It truly is.
We have covered so much ground today. We started with the harsh, brutal necessity of sailors centuries ago, desperately trying to maintain dignity in the middle of nowhere.
And then we explored the democratization of that ritual for modern civilians.
We navigated the intense logistics, too. The 3 nautical mile zoning laws, the physics of biodegradable shrouds, and the absolute necessity of licensed maritime professionals.
We looked at the economic shift away from the perpetual care of real estate toward the one-time investment in a profound experience.
And the environmental urgency of stepping away from toxic embalming in concrete vaults.
And ultimately, we explored how the paradox of an intimate boat on an infinite ocean can contextualize human grief and provide a unique form of healing.
It's a remarkable evolution of a human ritual. And it leaves me with a final provocative thought for you listening.
I'm curious where you're going with this.
It's a question that extends far beyond funeral planning, inspired by that idea of the ocean as a continuation of life's natural cycle.
Okay.
If we start viewing our final farewells not as a rigid, static ending locked in stone, but as a last sail, a dynamic, moving integration back into the massive ecosystem of the planet, how might that change the way we actually live our lives right now? If we truly accept that we are destined to dissolve back into the infinite moving currents of the natural world, does it change how tightly we cling to our static possessions and our need for control today?
That is a fascinating thing to think about.
It's something deeply worth pondering. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the last sail. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.